Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the June meeting of the Chinese Historical Society of Southern California. We've been providing public history for the past 47 years, and we hope that you can continue. If you're not already a member, we hope that you can join us. Just very briefly, this meeting is being recorded and will be available at a later point on YouTube, on the Historical Society's YouTube channel, and you can access that through our website, chssc.org. I'd like to introduce our speaker. As you know, we have very knowledgeable speakers come to share not only Chinese American history, but also their own family's history. In this case, we're going to get both. We're going to hear from Jessica Chew, who would talk about her family and her ancestor, Bodo Chew, and her family's origins in Fow Shek village in Guangdong, China, and the journey that family made to California. Jessica is the founder of the Helen and Joe Chew Foundation, and she's the only grandchild of Joe Chew, or Joe Yu Chew, who was a Chinese American born in 1921. The Chew family immigrated in 1865 as herbalist physicians and established their headquarters in Red Bluff, which is really at the far north end of California. And if you've driven along the 5, and what else can I say? Jessica has put together a really nice presentation for us, which really summarizes her family history. The foundation, the Helen and Joe Chew Foundation, was created to honor Jessica's promise to her grandfather. Her goal for the foundation is to share her family's loving memories of Red Bluff's historic Chinatown, while encouraging preservation of Asian American history and encouraging the pursuit of higher education. Pretty a noble cause. Anyway, Jessica, I'd like to welcome you, and please carry on.
Well, first, I'd like to say thank you to the Chinese Historical Society of Southern California for having me. I'm truly grateful to be here today and really excited to share my family's history. So as Eugene mentioned, I'm the only grandchild of Joe and Helen Chew. And today I'm going to share Tales from the Ming Terrace, which is the name of my grandfather's restaurant. And we've got a PowerPoint presentation for you. So I'm not sure if Ricky, you're able to get that up. So while we're waiting for the PowerPoint, I'll tell you a little bit about our foundation. We started in 2021 when my grandfather passed away at 99 and a half years old. And we did it in honor of education and the outcome that education has had on my entire family's life, and our history in Red Bluff, which I think my entire life that it was pretty important to my grandfather. It was preserved. And our foundation was able to successfully talk to the community of Tehama County, and we were able to get a street name, Historic Chinatown Alley, and it's 2 blocks. We have a mural that is in the Chinatown Alley behind my grandfather's old restaurant. And some of our other projects that we're working on includes a book called Images of America, Chinese in Tehama County, that will be out either the end of this year or next year. We are also working on a terracotta horse statue for the alley and landmarking our historic Chinese cemetery, and along with a scholarship fund that we've got available. I would like to tell you a little bit about my family's village and its historic nature. But I also want to start with a call of action, and that call of action to everybody that's on the call today is to make sure that we share our collective history and genealogy, because I think together we have a more clear idea and understanding of American history, particularly in California. And it's our collective stories. Once we share it, we understand a lot more about the time and period, along with it provides more color as far as what actually occurred in history. So I think it's important for us to all share our collective stories, including ours, and we hope that inspires the people to research their genealogy and pursue their own family history and share their stories. So we're on the China's Historic Site PowerPoint slide, so I guess I'll start there. And my family's village is called the Zhaosong Royal Village. It's filled with blue brick alleyways, and that's indicative of a proverb related to the road to all roads lead to Rome. And I'm not sure if you're able to change the slide, Ricky, to the next page. There you go. There's our historic site. So our village is a historic site. And it's amazing that China has preserved our village and given it that designation. But the other thing that's important about it is that it's famous for its culture, art, and education. China's first grammar book and dictionary was published in our village. And like I mentioned about the blue brick, which you see in a lot of villages with the Western design. Next page. Thanks to Sherman at the Chew Association in San Francisco, we were able to trace our genealogy and family tree to 827. This is a picture of the interior of our home in our village. My uncle had the panels translated, and it says, "God reaches far 1,000 years." Our family was extremely Christian, and we stayed faithful Christians prior to our arrival and after arrival in America. Next slide. So in our village, there's this mural that I think is remarkable. It's above our door. And the translation that my Uncle Ken got was that it says "Reform for a New World." And I like to think that the steamship that you see in the mural is traveling from our village to Red Bluff, because that's where our family settled. And our family's home has a little marker on it, and it's got the little historic placard there. But the Chew family, particularly Dr. Chew Yan, he built a Christian church in the village in 1914. And then when he died, part of his estate was to build a library in the village, and he died in 1947. Next slide. So the history about Red Bluff. Next slide. There were 5 original families that settled in Red Bluff, and that's because it was the last steamboat stop. It was the furthest point north the boats could travel on the Sacramento River, and as a result, a segregated neighborhood called Chinatown was created. Next slide. So here you see an 1881 lithograph. It's the most complete representation that we have of our Chinatown. And on the right-hand side, you can see our vice president and my cousin Bruce standing next to the mural that we had, which replicates this. So you see 2022 is the historic Chinatown alley naming, and it's exactly parallel to our Chinatown. And Bruce is pointing out where he lived. And so we like to ask the descendants to take a photo at the mural and point their location that they are from. This lithograph is extremely important. It recognizes our Chinese community, but it also gives a pretty good reflection as far as how the buildings looked. We've got pictures within our own Chew family collection, and it really shows what that looked like. Next slide. This is the slide. So you see here This is the first Chew to arrive from our family tree. He arrived in 1865. His name was Bodo Hong, but that's actually the name of his store, which means the Hall of the Protector of Health. He established the Red Bluff location as the headquarters in 1865. We found him in the 1870 census. Originally, our family thought we arrived in 1881. He was one of 2 Chinese doctors for the community. Since Chinese people weren't allowed to go to the hospital, he eventually became the only doctor for the community. And he also created essentially the longest generational family practice in Northern California for herbal medicine. And if you notice this picture, his attire is more of the traditional outfit. This picture was used for advertising in the newspaper. And after the 1900s, as we adopted Western culture, we no longer wore this attire. But this attire was indicative of the time period, and other herbalists did the same thing. Next slide. So this is what the Bodo Hong Hall looked like from 1865 to 1914. And on the right-hand side, you see a picture of our home. And it was the last building to be torn down in Chinatown of one of the wooden structures. And we were evicted in 1948 so that they could build oddly riverfront properties. And it became a nice neighborhood. But you can actually, it's just a wonderful picture. We're really fortunate enough to have it. Next slide. So in 1899, the great Bodo Hong asked his nephew, Dr. Chew Yuan, to come help him with the business in Red Bluff. Dr. Yuan had finished school. All of our family went to college in China, and they studied herbal medicine. And part of their herbal medicine was a really interesting education. It included arithmetic, how to run business, along with the medicinal aspects of the human body. So on the right-hand side, this is one of the ads of Bodo Hong on the left and Dr. Yan on the right. And then in 1881, this is my great-grandfather, Chew Yu. And you can see he's wearing the traditional clothing. His uncle actually brought him to Los Angeles, and he was brought in 1881, a year before the Chinese Exclusion Act. Next slide. So my great-grandfather's role was actually the bookkeeping and accounting, not the mixture of medicine. That was Dr. Chew Yen's responsibility. Eugene helped us locate this picture. And if you look at the picture, it says Chew Yen Company, which is the same name of the second Bodo Hong location in Red Bluff. And our family operated the Dun Sao Hong Company in 1894 until the Chinatown was demolished. And adjacent to it was the Chew Yen Company. And we typically had an herbal practice on one side and then a grocery store on the other side. So in this image, you can actually see that the Chew Yen Company is 3 window fronts. So it's a pretty big practice, even in Los Angeles. Next slide. So my great-grandfather, as I mentioned, he worked on the bookkeeping and accounting for multiple herbal practices that we ran. He arrived as a Methodist missionary. He was faithful to the church until his death, and he did the bookkeeping for those multiple practices, including one in Hong Kong and another one in Canton. And he used different banks, and we accepted all different types of currency. However, he also worked as a cook for Dr. Nathaniel Dalrymple. And I was really fortunate enough to meet his great-granddaughter, who provided these wonderful images. So this is the doctor that helped my great-grandfather immigrate. And then on the right-hand side, this is the location of where he lived. And so I thought that was something really amazing that I was fortunate enough to see. Next slide. So as I mentioned, Red Bluff became the headquarters for our herbal practices. When the Chew family members were traveling through Angel Island, they typically stopped in Red Bluff to visit our family. And also when they made their return trips from China, they would go ahead and take the steamboat stop to Red Bluff and visit our family. Our family was very popular. And you see in this image on the left is Dr. Bodo Hong and Dr. Chu Yen. And they also use this image for newspaper advertising all through the North State down to Sacramento. And below, this is the Chu Yen Company headquarters in Red Bluff. If you go to Red Bluff today, this building still stands. It's where my grandfather was born, my grand aunt and my family was born there. And then on the right-hand side, Dr. Chu Yen had 6 sons. All but 2 went into the herbal business, and they all practiced in the herbal practice. And so we were so fortunate because Dr. Chu Yen's second wife, her son, Owen, Fish, and Cahoon, would continue the Chu Yen Company in Red Bluff, making it the longest generational practice. And thanks to Dr. Chu Yen, we became the longest generational practice. Cahoon died in 1983. Owen, Fish, and Cahoon are all named after prominent Caucasian families in Red Bluff who helped our family over the years. Owen is named after the doctor who delivered the babies in Chinatown. Fish is named after our family attorney, and Cahoon is named after another pioneer in Red Bluff. Next slide. This is Dr. Chu Yen's oldest son. He went by the name Chu Si Wee, and his American name was Peter Chan. Now, he trained at the Los Angeles herbal practice for some time, and then he moved to Boston to take over the Fu and Wing Company. And the Fu and Wing Company was a very prominent practice in Redlands, San Bernardino, Los Angeles, before he settled in Boston. And when Tom Wing died, Peter Chan became the sole proprietor of that practice. And he married Tom Wing's wife, and he also adopted all the children. He started publishing preventative medical care in 1893. And this is a picture of the book that he was handing out at his practice. And what this book contained, it was in English, but it was to help people actually take care of themselves so they would see him less often, and so that they could have natural healing on their own when they're at home for their daily life. And it's 300 pages. You can access it through the Internet Archive, and I'll make sure that these links are available, but it's a wonderful book and it's really amazing. This particular picture of Tom Wing actually came from that book. Next slide. So Tom Wing's herbal practice actually started in Redlands, and then these are the photos of his different practices. On the left is his first practice in Los Angeles, and if you look closely at the picture, there's Chinese people and Caucasian people. Alongside his expanded location on Olive Street also was Caucasian and Chinese people. And his practice primarily served the Caucasian community. It costs between $8 and $14 a week for him to provide you care. And on the right-hand side, this is his last practice, and had the chance to go visit it, 564 Massachusetts Street. All of his practices were not in Chinese neighborhoods. And particularly in Boston, he's the only Chinese person on the entire street. Next slide. What's important to know is that Dr. Tom Wing is the nephew of Li Po Tai. Li Po Tai was a very famous herbal doctor in San Francisco. He arrived about the same time as Bodo Hong, which is 1865. By 1866, he became very, very well-known and successful. And these are different newspaper clippings about him. His practice was on 744 Washington Street. He was buried in Laurel Hill before it was relocated, so I'm not sure if they saved his burial. But in the article, you'll note that it says that some of his clients were astonishing, and they included Leland Stanford, and it also included Mark Hopkins. And on the right-hand side, when he died, this is the picture of him. So all of his grandnieces and nephews were adopted into the Chew family when Tom Wing died. Next slide. So as I mentioned, my great-grandfather's role was to do the bookkeeping. He could read and write English. He attended the Methodist Church in Pasadena, and he also attended the Methodist Church when he moved to LA. He's pictured on the upper left-hand side next to my great-grandmother, Mrs. Chew and Mr. Chew. Those are my great-grandparents. On the right-hand side is my Uncle Dick and Uncle Ned. And in 1914, we decided that we're going to move the whole family to America. And when my great-grandfather brought us to America, the kids were separated and they went through this just awful health inspection process that you see in the image below. But what's important is that my great-grandparents had this petition in their Angel Island file. It's got over 20 signatures on it. And these signatures are people, the most prominent townsmen of Red Bluff, including the mayor, multiple councilmen, presidents of banks, insurance presidents, and other leaders. A lot of the street names are some of the signers on this petition. And it demonstrated that they valued the Chinese community in Red Bluff. And part of that is because Tehama County existed before California was a state. And because it existed before it was a state, you have a lot of the town leaders and merchants not fully conforming to big government. And that included the Chinese Exclusion Act. In Red Bluff, some people owned property, and as you can see, this is a pretty powerful petition that was signed for my family. After a very strenuous detention and interrogation, we were finally able to come home, and my great-grandmother gave birth to a joyful baby girl, as you can see in the newspaper ad. And my Auntie Violet was born. Next slide. But just think that that one act of kindness of signing that petition would make it possible for possibly the last Chinese pioneer of Tehama County, Dr. Kenneth Chew. If you see the family portrait that I have on the bottom left is my Uncle Ken. He's known as the Oyster King in Seattle, and he would become an aquaculture pioneer. His accomplishments are many, but he revolutionized the shellfish industry, making it possible for us to enjoy shellfish all year long. And he even introduced the US-based scallop for the first time in China's coastline. Next slide. So I want to thank you, and I'm sure that there's going to be some questions. I've made some resource links available for everybody. You can read about the Chew family history in detail on our website. You can also access the Fu and Wing Company's Preventative Care, his 300-page book. My grandfather did a congressional gold medal interview, and he was on Good Morning Sacramento. And then you can also read about Ken Chew on We Are Puget Sound, along with where I access my resources for some of the images today. Thank you.
Okay, Albert, you can carry. You take it away.
Okay, thank you, Jessica. That was a wonderful presentation. So I think there's a couple of questions, but I'll start off with just a couple of questions that just on the research itself. I noticed you brought up certain resources like the US Census, Internet Archive, National Archives, and something very interesting. Many people might not know this, or many people probably do know this. Chinese Exclusion Act was passed. First time any racial group or national group was restricted from immigration to the US. But what it also did was created this like actual documentation of Chinese entering this country. You don't have that for any other ethnic group. So it's really useful for family history. And so what other, I know you listed some at the very end of your presentation, but what are some other sources you can go to, do genealogical studies or family history?
Yeah, that's a great question. Genealogy, I think, is pretty challenging for the Chinese community, just because you have multiple names for a single person. The Angel Island records help, but you have to know the dates that your family arrived and traveled, or at least approximate. A lot of the data is wrong, including like their age and the spelling of their names. So you kind of have to phonetically try to match it. With the Chew family, I can't take credit for our family history because I'm the fourth generation to actually take it on. And we've had our family preserve our history since 1903. Grace was married to Owen, and she did a wonderful job at starting documenting our family history in the 1950s. And then my grandfather also worked on our family history, and my Uncle Ken worked on our family history. So I'm really the fourth generation to take it on, and they've just done a wonderful job at preserving it. But because they did such a good job at preserving it, it was a little easier for me to reconcile all the dates and match it with the Angel Island records, which is how we were able to make these amazing connections with the other families in Boston and understand how our family tree branched off and created this enterprise of herbal practices.
Wow, you're extremely lucky that you were able to rely on your ancestors for this family history, because a lot of times they talk about how there's only one historian per generation, but it seems like you guys are all lined up, so that's remarkable. Before I go into some of these other questions here, you mentioned, I'm just a little curious, you had a street named after your grandfather and this wonderful mural in Red Bluff. What steps were taken in order to do that?
Yeah, well, luckily, I went to NYU for global real estate. So I kind of had a good idea of how the street naming process could be made meaningful to the city. However, there's a community called Happy in Eureka, and they really were our North Star. They helped guide us, and we call it Cities Helping Cities. I talked to them. I told them we're interested in learning how they did an alley street naming. They gave us their rubric, and we really just followed their playbook. They put up some murals. They got great responses from that. They did some other activities. We talked to them about high impact, high reward, and then we kind of decided which ways we would go from there. But they have been our ambassadors, North Star. They've helped us all the way through. And I think it's important for cities to help each other when you're trying to make this type of preservation.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, so every city has a different process, but yeah, to find that locally with a neighboring city, that's great.
Yeah, we copied their city municipality and got the zoning ordinance in place.
Awesome. So, there's been many narratives of Chinese American history from the 19th century, and a lot of times it's based on racial discrimination or, just perseverance, or sometimes just cultural nationalism. And I'm wondering, what else are you trying to communicate when you present your family history?
Yeah, that's a great question. When I'm presenting our family history, because I'm the fourth generation to take this on, it's important to me that the narrative is similar and is reflective of my family's attitude towards not only our town, but their own experiences. And as I mentioned, because Tehama County existed before California statehood, you have supporters of merchants helping merchants. And that includes the Caucasian merchants helping the Chinese merchants on their travel documents to immigrate. And in our book that we're going to publish, it's going to demonstrate all the different families that worked with different white merchants to help them travel and how they voyaged and what those complications were. But my own family's experience within Red Bluff was a very positive one. And as I mentioned, we have that petition that was signed, and it's so powerful to see all those prominent people where today you walk around the streets and you see these names on this petition that are now street names supporting the Chinese community. And so I think it's important for us to collectively come together and share our different stories, because I think it sheds light on the community aspect of what was going on during the time. So it really requires, I think, especially Chinese American history requires more people to share their family stories and work with other families to kind of get a more complete picture about what that was like for everybody.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I would glean from that the importance of direct action and a history of multiracial coalitions. Okay, so I'm going to take some questions from the chat. So I'm trying to do multiple things at the same time. So let's just go in. Okay, so let's start with the easy one. What is the name of the street named after Dr. Chew?
It's called Historic Chinatown Alley. In Chew tradition, it would be more meaningful to us as a family that the street name reflects everybody as a community. So we named it Historic Chinatown Alley.
Okay. Let's see. Here's another one was, what was the, okay, so you mentioned repeatedly about your family's religious backgrounds and Christianity when they were at least settled in the US. So what was the role of Christianity just in your family's perseverance?
Major. It was major. The Wong clan came before us in Red Bluff in 1862, and we came in 1865. The Chews became very much integrated into Western culture and the community at large because we were Christian and went to the same church and went to school together. We did not have segregated schools. And so you do have commingling of Caucasian and Chinese people. And a lot of that has to do with Christianity. But also Christianity provided an opportunity for education. Our family attended Peking College, what was called Lingham College back when we used to attend, and that's where we attended medical school. Medical school provided an opportunity for you to learn a little bit of Western culture. The Methodist Church provided an opportunity for my great-grandfather to know both Cantonese and English and the ability to write, and that was major. Before he died, he got sick, and people sent letters with money in it in an effort to save his life. So you can see the relationships that were established just because he was able to use his faith to make these relationships, and that faith also allowed him to communicate, and we were able to integrate into the community. And then also we brought it back to our home village, and I'm not sure if the chapel survived, but I hope it did.
Okay, I think you answered this one already, but Gary's asking if there was the formal training to become an herbalist. Was there formal training to become an herbalist in China, or did they pass it down to the fathers and sons?
Oh, that's a great question. It's both. So our family did not allow the boys to actually come to the US until they finished their education. And luckily we found a stack of my great-grandfather's books. That's how we know exactly which college he went to. The books are very comprehensive. They have encyclopedias, they've got acupuncture, arithmetic, business, a lot of different varieties. So it's very much like a school today for general medicine. And then in addition to that, there is the family recipes, there's an element of it being passed down from generations. And that's also how you kind of build reputation amongst the Chinese community. But as I mentioned, a lot of the clientele for the majority of our herbal practices were Caucasian.
Okay. Okay, here's one from Eugene asking a very large scoped question about the Chews in general. Did they establish other outposts in California other than Eureka and Red Bluff?
Yeah, they did. It seems like a wide enterprise. So one of the murals that I mentioned was Reform for the New World. I think that's pretty powerful because my great-grandfather we have his little directory book. It's got the English names and the Chinese names. And for anybody that wants to take a look at it, there's 125 addresses in the little book, and we've got it on our website. But those addresses span from Burma to Mexico, all across the United States. So there's a big community of Chews traveling from our village and going overseas, and it wasn't just specific to the United States.
Okay. Now here's a very specific question for you. There's a famous story with Leland Stanford's wife respiratory condition that was cured by a Dr. Yi in Fiddletown. Do you know if there's any relationship between that story and Dr. Chew or Dr. Yi?
No, I have not been able to make the connection with Fiddletown, but I do know that it's called Chew Key. The only connection that we have with Fiddletown is I happen to work in Panyu a lot, and that's where he was from.
Okay, so wow, there's some other specific questions here. Okay, one of our participants is from Canada, and she's stating that there are 10 division villages in Fow Shek. So she wants to know exactly which division is your family from.
I think we're 6, and my cousin Bruce is 7, and Sherman Chew from the Chew Association is 8, because I remember 6, 7, 8.
Okay. So I'm going to share something with the rest of the group. There is I did a family history myself, and I was in a Search of Roots program out of San Francisco. And one of the great things that come out of that project is this gigantic database of families that come from, you know, little villages all throughout Guangdong, or at least the 8 districts that they all came from, where a lot of diaspora comes from that area from the 19th century. And you can still input stuff. You can actually look up your village. You can see other families from there. So that's another resource you can go to. And you can also check in exactly which, you can narrow it down to your village too, and see, who else has inputted, their relatives. Okay, let's move on. Okay, here's a good interesting question. How much Chinese does your generation speak?
None. My grandfather could barely order at restaurants. And I was really lucky that he lived almost 100, because he had 100 years of wisdom. And I tried to pay attention as the only grandchild. But there was not much left to transition to me. I'm not even sure I could do any better than he could ordering. I'm very good at Google Translate, though.
Okay, I don't know if I missed. Oh, here's a simple question. Which Christian denomination did your family belong to?
Yeah,
they're very interested in you in particular.
We were Methodist until my great-grandfather died. And then we went to the Presbyterian Church, which is now the oldest church in Red Bluff. And a lot of the Chews were baptized there.
Okay. Okay, Linda asks, first she says it's a great presentation, and she sees that a lot of your ancestors wore imperial clothing, and she's wondering if you were able to preserve any of them.
Yes, we do not have the imperial clothing. However, we do have my great-grandfather's traditional outfit, the black silk. And we've got documentation that my great-grandmother, he would buy the silk from Hong Kong, take it to the village, and my great-grandmother would hand sew these outfits for him. But he didn't wear that anymore after the 1900s. He only wore it for the short period of time that he was living in Los Angeles and Pasadena. And he also had these undergarments. They were cotton, like long johns, and they were really thick. And so he would have worn that under his silk clothing. That did not get preserved, unfortunately. But we do have the traditional clothing that you see in a lot of images of the men in the long, dark silk clothing with his hat.
Okay, so I think we have some more society business to do, but I'll leave it with one last question. And we're going to bring up one of my favorite books. It's called The City of Quartz. It is probably the preeminent history text of Los Angeles. And a couple of amazing things he does in this text is, besides giving a comprehensive well-written narrative of Los Angeles, is some of the chapters can be really instructive. Some of them are very witty. In his chapter called Homegrown Revolution, he, it basically remarks on how homeowners are trying to increase their property value, but he's actually making fun of them. And it's a satire of Karl Marx's 18th Premier of Louis Bonaparte. The chapter I want to talk to you about is his last chapter is called Junkyard of Dreams. And that's actually where he was born, in Fontana. But that chapter is actually a really instructive method of how to study public history. And, you've given us a lot of you shared a lot of stuff of your family history, some, even some parts about sharing stuff with local cities, how to get stuff passed. But I was wondering, is there anything else you can share that can be instructive about, how you do a study on Red Bluff, but it's actually a study about direct action, could you expand on what else you're trying to, some bigger project you're trying to connect?
I have to be honest, I haven't read that book, but I'm going to take your word for it and pick it up. But I think when I'm thinking about public action, I think we've got to kind of take the same approach of our ancestors when they developed Chinatowns. Because if you think about a Chinatown, what is that exactly? Well, it's a central business district, and most of those neighborhoods are central business districts today. If you look up the old Chinatowns, their location and what we call it today is a central business district. And that is essentially a compilation of everything that you need to have economic success within your town and your community. So when we think about community, we think about the viability of it. We think about its ability to support the community. We also think about its makeup to make sure that it's diverse and it can be sustainable. And I think of Chinatowns in that way. And I also think about history in that way. You've got to look at all the different pieces and how it makes it whole. And part of that is probably because I have a real estate development background, but part of that is also because I think that that's what Chinatown means to me. So when I look at the oral history, I look at this amazing ability to take this land in this primitive country, bring all these resources and innovation together, and essentially do this divide and conquer and make these economic neighborhoods thrive. And if you go from town to town and Chinatown to Chinatown, you kind of see the same approach where they took everything that they needed, they made the essentials, and the community thrived until the 1900s. And a lot of the Chinatowns no longer exist because you have to move on and expand and go to other thriving neighborhoods. And that's just the evolution over time.
Okay, so I'll actually ask one more question, and then you answered part of the stuff already. But as someone who's conducted family history, as well as your relatives that you're able to grab onto, do you have any advice on how other people that want to do family history, like what are some of the lessons you learned, or some of the best practices you would like to share?
Oh yeah, oral history. It's so important to record. Take the most elderly folks in your family and just ask them questions about their life and record it, because there's going to be so many little things that it doesn't matter how many times you watch it, you're like, oh, there's a little piece there, there's a little piece there. And collaborate and work together, share pictures, reconcile those images together. So much of our family story is working with Dr. Dalrymple's granddaughter, great-granddaughter, and working with Dr. Chu Yan's great-granddaughter, and then my cousins, and looking at all of our different pictures. And then we were able to match that with a lithograph. And then we were able to understand our family history. So interview the elderly, record it. If you have time, pull the Angel Island file from NARA, because my aunt's 99. We just pulled her father's Angel Island record from 1901, and she had never seen a picture of her dad so young, and that sparks a whole different discussion. So use your time wisely. Take the oral history, record it, write it down. Maybe you don't understand it right now, but you will later.
Okay, well, thank you very much for your wonderful presentation and participating in this Q&A. And wait, one last question. I think this is an easy one. Are there any shoes left in Red Bluff today?
I'll be the last person for my family. There's 5 total people. I have 2 cousins there, Cyrus and Aaron, And then there are two Wongs who are actually also Lu. And so of us 5 people, after we're gone, that's it.
Oh, that's the story of Chinese diaspora. Always going
Yeah.
to places. Okay, so I'd like to thank Jessica for everyone here on this call. And now I'm going to pass it back to Eugene as we have some society business talk.
Thank you, Albert, for handling it. And Jessica, I'd like to thank you really for a really enlightening presentation. And actually, if we were in person, I'd like to have a round of applause for everybody and we hope we can hear more from you as you continue with your research, because I'm sure that with the legacy that was started since 1865, I think there's more to it, and I think maybe there'd be something written in the future that we can share. But of course, people can go to your website and in Red Bluff and then learn more about that legacy. Anyway, thank you everyone for joining in today. I would like to bid everyone a good evening and thank you for joining us. And we look forward to seeing you again.